Hello again, Agape Church and friends. Welcome into the Building Up podcast. This is episode number 101. Thank you guys for being with us today. I'm David, and we are continuing on the podcast right now to go through the wise sayings of the Old Testament book of Proverbs. On today's podcast, we are going to be covering chapter 19. So I hope you've already read that chapter or that you will take time to read it either before you listen to the rest of the podcast or as soon as we're done, and whichever way that you will find it to be most beneficial as we look at some of the key proverbs out of each one of these chapters. We've been trying to group them into themes. You see that a lot in Proverbs. I think these passages are probably a lot more closely connected and tied together than sometimes we think they are. So we've been kind of grouping them into themes, but however the Lord leads you to study and that he can show you what these proverbs mean, they are a way that God has ordained for us to gain wisdom and in gaining wisdom, to learn more about Jesus, who is the man of wisdom. And so as we gain wisdom, we gain understanding of Jesus. As we become wise people, we are becoming people who live like Jesus lives. So on today's episode of the podcast, again, chapter 19. Now, one of the big themes that I saw in chapter 19 have to do with human desires and human plans. And there's some pretty key proverbs here in chapter 19 that talk about those things. Let's start with verse 2. Verse 2 says, desire without knowledge is not good. And whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. This is a very interesting proverb. I think what it is saying here really could probably be looked at through two different lenses. The first lens is this: to achieve something that you really desire without actually being ready for it, without having the knowledge that you need in order to be able to really enjoy that desire, ultimately is going to cause you to miss out, to miss your way. I think, let's say that desire was a new career or a different position in your career. Let's say that desire is a relationship desire, maybe entering into, if you're single, a relationship with a man or a woman in order to hopefully find a husband or find a wife. Maybe this has something to do with an achievement in education, but whatever it may be, it's possible that if you were to achieve that desire without complete preparation, without really being ready, if you make haste to quickly get there and you're not actually ready when you get there, then you may actually stumble and fall, and you may not be able to actually enjoy that thing that you desired so much. Now, another way that I think that we could look at this, another lens or an approach to this proverb would be saying, thinking that you desire something without really researching it is quite foolish. Desire without knowledge is not good. So to desire something, but really to have not researched it and considered it and made sure that it's a good thing for you to desire, that is also foolish. And I think that could go hand in hand with the first interpretation or the first view of that proverb, because if we really do desire something, I think it should be because we've done as much investigation as we can. We've prayed as much as we can. We've talked to other people and received counsel as much as we can so that we can make sure, yes, this thing is really what I desire. I remember one time being so upset in my job, and this was probably almost 20 years ago, and it was in one of the first jobs I ever had at IT in information technology and computers, and I was working at a company, and I didn't like my boss. I didn't like my job. I didn't like what I was doing. And I remember seeing this ad in the paper for a position. It was managing a cleaners. And I remember seeing how much money it paid. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go apply for that. And I literally went to this cleaners, and I gave them an application to my resume, and I applied for the job to be a manager, basically based on two things. One, I didn't like my current job, and two, it would be a lot more money. And I look back now and I think, man, how foolish that was. I had no idea what it was like to manage the cleaners, but forget that. I didn't know what kind of hours it was. I didn't know anything about that job, yet I was ready to go and take that job. I did not really research what I thought I desired. And the Lord protected me in keeping me from getting that job. So verse 2, there's a lot there in knowledge attached to our desires. Verse 3 is very interesting when it comes to our desires and our plans, and you could connect it to the proverb that we just looked at. But it says, when a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord. So here's a proverb that tells us sometimes people will come to ruin because they don't actually seek wisdom. They don't actually follow wisdom, but then when they come to a place of ruin, they'll blame God for it. So attach that to what we were just talking about. Like if you go after something you think you desire, you don't really pray about it, or you just kind of pray about it superficially, then you get it and you're destroyed because of it. You become to some kind of ruin because of it. You might end up blaming God. I mean, if I'd got that job at the cleaners, right? And what if it turned out to be really bad and then I'd gotten angry at God about it? That would have certainly been very silly. And that's what the proverb is saying here, that we have to take responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our own actions. We need to seek after wisdom. We need to line our lives up with what God says and not find ourselves in a position of blaming him when actually we didn't follow after him. We didn't seek after him. I think a lot of times God protects us from those things, but sometimes as a matter of discipline, God may let us chase after something and even achieve it, only for us to find out it wasn't the right thing. And rather than blame God, we should repent. And we should learn a lesson about how important it is to pursue God and seek wisdom in our desires. Verse 8 says, whoever gets sense loves his own soul. He who keeps understanding will discover good. I think that's important for us to understand as we pursue our desires and we make plans, that the best kind of self-care is to become a person who is seeking the wisdom of God. The person who seeks the wisdom of God shows that they love themselves. They love their soul because they know that's what's best for them. Verse 15 and verse 24 both teach us about the importance of work. So the Bible tells us that we should wait on the Lord, but waiting on the Lord doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean we jump ahead of him either in our desires and our plans and trying to achieve those things. But most of the time, waiting on the Lord also doesn't mean inactivity. It doesn't mean that we sit back and that we wait and we do nothing. Most of the time, it means that we're busy doing work and the work God has given us to do while we wait on him to bring us the desires and the plans, or to help us achieve the desires and the plans that we have. So I think there's a danger in getting ahead of God and chasing after those desires without really praying and making plans without really seeking wisdom. And I think that's what the first few Proverbs we read were about. But I also think that it's dangerous to lag behind God, to become an apathetic or an inactive person in the name of trying to wait on the Lord. We can wait on him while we are working. Verse 20 says, listen to advice and accept instructions that you may gain wisdom in the future. So as we make our plans and as we seek after our desires, we should be listening to advice and instructions now for what we need in the future. This is just a great way of saying, put mentors in your life. Put people in your life for the things that you desire. If you desire to be married and have a family, right now you need to surround yourself with some good godly mentors who have good godly marriages, and not perfect marriages, but people who know how to live and be faithful to God in the midst of marriage. Put those people in your life now and listen to their instruction now, that you may gain wisdom that you need in the future. In my setting, where I think so much about pastoring, because that has been for so long in my life, that was the desire that I was pursuing. I was always so blessed to have good pastoral mentors in my life that even though I had not reached that place of being the pastor of a church, I had pastors who were feeding into me and investing in me. And whatever good I may be able to do today as a pastor has so much to do with that wisdom that I was gaining from those men in my life 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That is so important for us to do as we make our plans and we seek after our desires. Verse 21, this is a key proverb for me. I'll tell you a story in just a moment. But verse 21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. This verse came at a time much later than the first story I shared with you, where I actually was seeking after God and I was pursuing him regarding a decision that I needed to make about ministry and actually whether or not to pursue a position in ministry. And this has still been 10 years ago, but I was trying to decide whether to pursue a position in ministry, and I was agonizing over that decision because I didn't know if it was the right thing. So I went from a place in my life where I really wasn't praying and asking God for anything to where I was a place in my life where I was almost paralyzed and didn't know what decision to make because I didn't want to make the wrong one. And I remember being in this season where I was out every night after my family went to bed, and I was prayer walking and asking God to please help me, to please show me the way that I should go, because I didn't know whether to pursue this ministry position or not. And I kept agonizing, what if I pursue it and I get it and it's not right and I ruin that church or I ruin myself? But what if I don't pursue it and I miss out on what God has for me? And I remember just praying and praying. And one night I came in from prayer walking. I came in from being out and asking God these questions. And for some reason, I remember I made myself a bowl of ice cream and I was sitting there and eating the ice cream. And I just opened the Bible up and started reading. And my eyes fell on Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. And it was like in that moment, it was like God said, David, you're seeking me. You can't ruin anything. You can plan and plan, but my purposes will prevail. Trust me. I think it's the way James puts it in the New Testament when he says, if you lack wisdom, ask God for wisdom, but then trust him. Trust him that he gives it. Because if you ask him and then you don't trust him, you'll still end up like this wave getting tossed by the wind. Did I really hear from God? Did I not hear from God? Ask for wisdom. And then when the time comes, make the best decision that you can make and trust that God is giving you exactly what you asked him for, which was wisdom. And then in the end, your plans are not going to prevail over his purposes, but rather his purposes will prevail over your plans. I think that is such an important proverb for us. And finally, we'll end with verse 27. That is kind of a warning proverb. Not kind of a warning, it is a warning. Cease to hear my instructions, son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. I remember one of those godly mentors I was talking about a moment ago, the first mentor I had in pastoral ministry, telling me that I needed to always remain teachable. That if I ever came to a moment to where I wasn't learning and I wasn't just continuing to try to gain knowledge, and if I stopped being teachable, then I would no longer be fit to be a pastor. The wise are always learning. They never think they've arrived. They're always trying to hear from God, hear his instructions, and gain knowledge. And I think it's interesting when you think about this passage and Solomon. You know, we really don't for sure know the end of Solomon's life. There's some people that believe that we do know he strayed from the Lord. Absolutely. We know that. Some people believe he came back to God toward the end of his life and made amends and repented. Other people don't know that he did. And maybe they think that he stayed in his folly. And you think, how did the wisest man who ever lived become a fool? Well, Verse 27, because if you cease to hear God's instructions, if you cease to look for his wisdom, then you will stray. You won't stay on that path. Your natural inclination will kick in, and you will veer off the path of knowledge and wisdom, and you will veer into foolishness. And it can happen to Solomon. It could happen to any of us. We must remain teachable as we seek out our life's plans and our life's desires. Well, that's the only theme of Proverbs that we have to get to today, but we did cover a lot. I hope it was helpful to you here on this episode of the podcast, and I look forward to being with you again on the next episode, Lord willing. Grace and peace to your family.
Thank you for listening to the Building Up Podcast, a ministry of Agape Church in Pinson, Alabama. If you have a question about today's podcast or would like to suggest a topic for the future, please email us, buildingup@agapepinson.com. To subscribe to this podcast, simply search for Building Up from Agape Church in your favorite podcast app. So fierce, he looked straight into me and said, "Son, I'm giving you victory. I can hear the sound